Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we cut through the noise, examine the world's most crucial systems, and deliver the core insights you need to know.
Today, we are focused entirely on perhaps the defining challenge of our era, navigating uncertainty.
And we're not just looking for, a few quick tips. We are exploring a systematic framework. It's designed to help leaders, professionals, anyone really, operate with crystal clarity.
To adapt with confidence and ultimately to win with conviction.
We are diving deep into the E.D.G.E. framework, which was developed by the strategic leader and behavioral psychologist, Sam Sivarajan.
In this deep dive, it really addresses a profound paradox of modern leadership.
Which is?
It's why exceptionally intelligent, really successful people often either freeze up in analysis paralysis,
Very opposite.
or they rush into poorly conceived decisions precisely when that clarity matters the most. Our mission today is to distill the structure that transforms unpredictability, that constant state of chaos we all live in, from a paralyzing threat into a genuine, measurable competitive advantage.
Yeah, and if you just look around, the world itself is a continuous stress test for decision-making. I mean, we don't have to look back very far for some really high-impact examples.
Not at all.
Everyone remembers that sheer, disorienting rush of the March 2020 pandemic lockdown. Within, a matter of days, supply chains just fractured.
Workforce is scattered.
And organizations were forced into this radical restructuring, demanding these incredibly high-stakes decisions based on fragmented, incomplete, and often conflicting information.
That kind of rapid, disruptive change is exactly what this framework is built to handle. I mean, consider the lightning-fast collapse of Silicon Valley Bank in March 2023.
The fastest bank failure in U.S. history.
Exactly. And while countless businesses and investors panicked and took these heavy losses, others, the ones who had superior decision architectures in place, they pivoted quickly.
So they were prepared in a different way.
In a structural way. They secured alternative banking, they strengthened client relationships, and they actually emerged stronger. The difference between those who scrambled and those who acted wasn't luck or some kind of insider information.
It was the quality of their approach under pressure.
That's the key. And when leaders fail to account for true uncertainty, the consequences, well, they can be catastrophic.
And the outline for our deep dive highlights the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster in 2011 as just a prime example of that kind of systemic oversight cascading into total failure.
It's a perfect, if tragic, example. The primary trigger was, of course, the massive tsunami following the Great East Japan earthquake.
Right.
But the disaster itself unfolded not because they ignored the possibility of tsunamis, but because they only planned for a manageable known risk.
Okay, so what did they plan for? What was the known risk they built around?
The plant's defenses were meticulously designed for a maximum 5.7-meter wave, and that was based on let's say, a limited historical data set.
And the historical evidence suggested that this was insufficient.
Massively insufficient. Historical, geological, and archaeological evidence showed that far larger waves had struck that coastline in the past. So when the actual wave hit, it was nearly 15 meters. It just completely overwhelmed the defenses.
Wow.
And crucially, the external power grid was severed, but the backup generators, which are essential for cooling the reactors.
The last line of defense.
The last line of defense. They were placed on low ground where they were immediately flooded by the unanticipated height of the wave.
It's a failure of tight coupling, isn't it? As Charles Perrow warned, tight coupling in complex systems means these unexpected interactions of small failures can cascade so rapidly.
It's the perfect definition. The small failure was the insufficient wave defense.
Right, the 5.7-meter wall.
And the unexpected interaction was a simultaneous flooding of those generators, which led to total cooling failure and ultimately meltdown.
A perfect illustration of prioritizing a predictable known risk over preparing for true uncertainty. A 15-meter black swan event.
And that really sets the context for why this E.D.G.E. framework is so essential today.
So now let's establish the philosophical grounding for all this. Tell us about the author, Sam Sivarajan. I mean, where does this unique adaptive perspective come from?
Well, Sivarajan's own background is really the ultimate testament to necessary adaptation. He describes his early life as a mini laboratory for change.
A mini laboratory?
Yeah. He was born in India, moved to Montreal at age 5, and over the next 13 years, he attended 8 different schools.
8 schools?
Including 3 different high schools in 4 years. This forced him to constantly reestablish norms, relationships, and his own identity in completely new, unknown environments.
That's a crash course in resilience. You have no choice but to adapt.
Absolutely. And his professional life followed a really similar trajectory. He moved from corporate law to investment banking in London and Vienna, and then finally into wealth management, all while earning a doctorate in investor behavioral psychology.
So he's seen this problem from multiple angles.
From every angle. This global patchwork of intense professional transitions, coupled with his background in extreme endurance challenges like climbing in the Himalayas, the Andes, the Alps, it solidified his deep understanding of decision-making under existential stress.
What did he learn from that?
He learned that successful outcomes are less about innate talent and much more about systematic responsiveness.
This all sounds intensely practical, but you mentioned the framework has deep philosophical roots in Stoicism. How does an ancient philosophy connect to modern banking and corporate strategy?
The connection is Seneca, who lived under the capricious and often violent rule of Emperor Nero in the 1st century.
Not exactly a stable environment.
Not at all. So Stoicism, as practiced by Seneca, wasn't some academic theory. It was a pragmatic, psychological survival manual. It focused relentlessly on defining the boundary between what you can control, your own judgment, your intentions, your reactions, and what you cannot.
Which is everything else.
External events, other people's actions, market shifts, all of it. It's the ultimate control framework applied to chaos.
So Sivarajan pulls from that directly.
Precisely. He highlights 4 core Stoic virtues that serve as the moral and psychological foundation for the E.D.G.E. framework.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is wisdom. This means the ability to make sound judgments. Seneca said, "The more a mind takes in, the more it expands." It's about seeking truth over comfort, even and especially if that truth is uncomfortable.
So for a CEO, that means listening to the bad news, not just the good.
Exactly. The second is courage. And not just physical bravery, but the resolve to act virtuously in the face of difficulty. Difficulty strengthens the mind as labor does the body.
Then there's justice.
Right. Acting fairly and ethically, recognizing your role in the larger system. Nothing is more honorable than a grateful heart. This informs the choices you make under pressure.
And the last one is temperance.
Which is self-control and moderation, particularly when it comes to desire and ambition. Seneca said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." This is crucial for avoiding the trap of rigid goals, which we'll get into.
So those virtues provide the internal compass. How does that foundation translate into the systematic operational approach that forms the E.D.G.E. framework?
Well, the framework is structured into 2 major operational parts. Part 2 is all about establishing a foundation. This is the stable platform, the non-negotiables you define before you act.
Okay.
And we use the acronym CAST for this: control, align, span, and track.
CAOT provides the stability. And then part 3, that's the dynamic execution phase.
Correct. That's the E.D.G.E. in action, where E.D.G.E. stands for diagnose, go, and evolve. This provides the structure for thoughtful, calculated action and rapid adaptation when you're under pressure.
Okay, let's unpack this entire system, starting with that first part, the philosophical shift that you need to successfully navigate uncertainty, owning the unknown. We begin with a really tough lesson from Chapter 1, navigating uncertainty, which is the absolute danger of rigid goals. And the source uses the extreme environment of Mount Everest to illustrate this point.
Yeah, specifically the devastating 1996 tragedy where 8 climbers died in a single storm.
An event many people are familiar with.
And it's a perfect metaphor for corporate failure. The climbers, having spent weeks suffering, investing vast sums of money, enduring this massive physical effort, they developed a profound fixation on the summit.
Summit fever.
Exactly. And despite clear escalating warnings, the weather was deteriorating, there were timing issues, retreat felt psychologically unacceptable.
I recall the critical point was the pre-agreed turnaround time. They set a non-negotiable deadline for leaving the summit, whether they reached it or not, to ensure a safe descent before dark.
Precisely. They blew past that deadline, driven by that summit fever, and several high-profile leaders failed to enforce it. They sacrificed the safety process for the outcome goal.
And that unwillingness to adapt to the unfolding reality, the immediate change in their environment, that sealed their fate.
It did. And this fixation on a single outcome, even when the environment is screaming for you to adapt, is so widespread. The source provides a chilling corporate parallel with the history of Boeing.
Boeing was, for decades, the absolute pinnacle of American engineering.
It was. But the seeds of disaster were really sown after its 1997 merger with McDonnell Douglas. The culture shifted, and it shifted fundamentally.
How so?
The traditional priority of engineering and safety excellence was superseded by a ruthless focus on financial goals, cost-cutting, speed to market, and maximizing shareholder returns above all else.
And this cultural shift directly contributed to the 737 MAX disasters.
Yeah.
Can you tell us specifically how that goal fixation translated into a technical failure?
Well, the primary technical issue was the reliance on the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MC. To meet these aggressive market timelines and compete with Airbus, Boeing rushed to adapt an existing airframe, the 737.
Right.
And that required the MCS software to compensate for new, larger engines. But critically, to save costs and training time, Boeing prioritized minimizing the need for pilots to undergo extensive simulator training.
Which meant they minimized the official documentation and the acknowledgement of just how aggressive the MCS system could be.
Exactly. The relentless pursuit of the financial goal lower training costs, faster delivery, it led directly to the suppression of critical design information. Engineers and pilots who raised concerns were just overlooked.
The goal of hitting shareholder return targets became the ultimate guiding principle.
It overrode the core value of safety, and that led, ironically, to billions in fines, massive stock depreciation, and the tragic loss of life.
Another classic failure of inflexibility, though in a different sector, was Nokia's rapid demise.
Oh, yeah. Nokia, in the early 2000s, controlled over 40% of the mobile phone market. They were a titan, and they had adapted successfully for a century, from a paper mill to rubber manufacturing to electronics. They knew how to change.
Yet, when the iPhone launched in 2007, redefining the entire mobile ecosystem, Nokia just froze.
They mistook the nature of the change. They clung so tightly to their established product line, confident in their physical keyboard, their battery life, their customer loyalty.
So instead of embracing the foundational uncertainty of this new ecosystem software, apps, touchscreens, they chose to aggressively optimize what they already knew.
That's the key. They made incremental improvements to their existing devices rather than pivoting to the future. And by 2013, they sold their phone business to Microsoft, having collapsed entirely.
The psychology of why we cling to these rigid goals, even when they're so clearly destructive, is crucial here.
It is, and this brings us to the research of organizational psychologist Lisa Ordonez in her seminal work, Goals Gone Wild. She analyzed how this excessive focus on narrow, specific goals creates a dangerous psychological tunnel vision.
And she identified 4 specific dangers that result from this. Let's start with the clearest example, unethical behavior.
The prime systemic example of this is Wells Fargo. The company implemented this aggressive 8 is great strategy.
Right.
It pressured employees to cross-sell 8 financial products to every single customer. The quotas were, for all practical purposes, impossible to meet honestly.
And what was the psychological consequence of setting those unattainable targets?
The relentless pressure and the fear of job loss led to fraud on a massive scale. Employees created millions of unauthorized accounts, often without the customer even knowing, just to hit those specific sales quotas.
So goal fixation, when it's tied to performance metrics and compensation, it's systematically bred unethical behavior,
resulting in over $3 billion in fines.
The second danger she points out is excessive risk-taking.
And this is where we look at Enron. Their culture was predicated on relentless, aggressive performance goals and constantly making the numbers. This obsession drove executives into fraudulent accounting practices.
Like using special-purpose entities to hide debt.
Exactly. To conceal enormous debt and artificially inflate their earnings. They prioritized appearing successful in the short term, blinding themselves to ethical and legal viability, and that led to total collapse.
The third danger is the suppression of critical information.
This is really just confirmation bias in a corporate setting. When you're deeply committed to a goal, any information that contradicts your chosen path is subconsciously dismissed or actively ignored.
We saw this at Boeing.
We did. The urgency to meet market timelines meant that pilot concerns, particularly about the aggressive nature of the MCS, were intentionally glossed over or minimized in the training manuals. The goal just overrode the data.
And the fourth danger, which killed companies like Blockbuster, is simple tunnel vision. Just blindness to alternative solutions.
Blockbuster was completely fixated on optimizing the brick-and-mortar rental model, managing inventory, late fees, store locations. They completely missed the transformative power of digital distribution.
And famously, they had a chance to get in on the ground floor.
In 2000, they passed up the opportunity to acquire a tiny, unprofitable online DVD rental startup called Netflix for just $50 million. They couldn't see past their current goal structure. A decade later, they filed for bankruptcy.
That fear of admitting failure plays into a related danger you mentioned, the escalation of commitment.
Psychologists Staw and Ross studied this phenomenon. It explains why people and organizations persist with failing courses of action. It's fueled by the sunk cost fallacy.
The more you've invested, the harder it is to quit.
Right. The more resources, time, money, reputation you've poured in, the harder it is to walk away, regardless of the future outlook. It's the Everest climbers refusing to turn back when they're only 500 feet from the summit.
And the other driver of this is the fear of public failure.
Exactly. Executives often continue a failing strategy simply to avoid admitting poor performance to shareholders or the public. It's an attempt to save face.
Like the Toshiba accounting scandal.
In 2015, where executives systematically overstated profits by $1.2 billion, it was a desperate, multi-year attempt to mask poor financial performance and avoid that public failure.
Okay, so if rigid goals are so dangerous, we have to correctly identify the operational environment, which brings us to the crucial difference between risk and true uncertainty.
And this distinction, which is rooted in the work of economist Frank Knight back in the 1920s, is the conceptual cornerstone of the entire E.D.G.E. framework.
So let's break it down. What is risk?
Risk is knowable and quantifiable. We can model the probability of outcomes even if we can't predict the specific result.
Can you give us a clear example of that calculable risk?
Sure. Banks, for instance, knew in 2007 that subprime mortgages had a calculable default rate, maybe 20 or 30%. They could price that risk into their models. Insurance companies do this every day. They model the risk of floods or car accidents based on vast data sets. The game and its rules are known.
But uncertainty is different.
Completely different. Uncertainty exists when we cannot even identify all the possible outcomes, let alone calculate their likelihood.
So going back to 2008.
When Lehman Brothers collapsed, it wasn't a standard known default risk. It was the total unanticipated collapse of interconnected credit markets globally. Their sophisticated risk models failed not because they miscalculated, but because the foundational rules of the financial game changed overnight. That is true uncertainty.
And technology, rather than helping us with this, often creates a dangerous illusion of control over this uncertainty.
It does. We see that when sophisticated systems encounter real-world novelty. We celebrated IBM's Deep Blue defeating Kasparov in 1997 as this triumph of calculation.
Right.
But real-world, complex, dynamic situations reveal the limits of calculated risk models. Consider Air France Flight 447 in 2009. The plane was state-of-the-art. But when the autopilot failed due to ice crystallization, the highly trained pilots, perhaps over-reliant on the automation, couldn't react fast enough to the conflicting signals and entered a fatal nosedive.
They were trained for routine, but not for the sudden introduction of novelty and conflicting information.
Or the 2018 Uber self-driving car accident. The AI misidentified a pedestrian pushing a bicycle as some contraption on wheels and failed to register the threat. The algorithm was optimized for known scenarios, other cars, standard pedestrians, but it failed when presented with a novel, ambiguous, and lethal scenario. True uncertainty defies prediction.
This leads us directly to Nassim Nicholas Taleb's idea of black swans. If we can't predict these high-impact, unforeseen events, what's the strategic goal?
The strategic goal has to shift from prediction to building anti-fragility. The ability not just to survive disruption, but to grow stronger from it. If your organization is only designed to manage known risks, you are inherently brittle and vulnerable to the unknown.
Kodak, the company that literally invented the digital camera, is the classic tragedy of brittleness.
Kodak invented the technology in the 1970s, but management shelved it. And you have to ask why.
Right. Why would they do that?
Because they saw the digital revolution as a manageable risk to their film business, which was generating colossal profits. They optimized the film business right up until digital cameras, and later, smartphones made that entire paradigm obsolete.
They failed to embrace the foundational uncertainty.
And they paid the ultimate price, declaring bankruptcy in 2012.
But the flip side of that is the strategic genius of Satoru Iwata at Nintendo.
A great counter-narrative. By the early 2000s, the video game industry was focused entirely on competing on certainty. More power, better graphics, higher technical specs. It was dominated by Sony and Microsoft. And Iwata looked at this and said, "We are fighting the wrong war." He recognized that competing on power was just optimizing known risks within a shrinking niche.
So he chose to navigate true uncertainty instead.
He did by pivoting toward accessibility and novelty. The result was the Nintendo Wii. It launched with dramatically inferior hardware, but it introduced motion controls, and that expanded the market entirely to new demographics families, older adults.
It was an act of profound strategic courage.
Embracing the unknown, and it sold over 100 million units.
A huge success that came not from setting a predictable revenue goal, but from trusting a superior adaptive process. And this brings us to the final point of the mindset shift. Success is a consequence of process.
This is the core truth of E.D.G.E. Obsession with outcomes is damaging. True success is the byproduct of rigorous, repeatable, and high-quality internal processes.
Like David Tepper during the 2008 financial crisis.
Exactly. While most investors were paralyzed by fear, Tepper methodically accumulated positions in struggling institutions like Citigroup and Bank of America.
So why was that a process success and not just him getting lucky?
Because he didn't predict the exact moment of recovery, he trusted his pre-established, rigorous investment process, which indicated that these institutions, though temporarily undervalued, had underlying assets that would recover given the government intervention he assumed was coming.
So his $7 billion profit was a natural consequence of his superior decision architecture.
Not a successful prediction of the future. And the legendary coach John Wooden applied this principle masterfully.
10 NCAA basketball championships in 12 years.
An incredible record. And he realized early on that pursuing championships directly was, in his words, futile and exhausting. So he shifted his focus entirely to the daily discipline of practice, focusing on fundamental execution.
Can you tell us specifically about that process focus? What did that look like?
His training was obsessive about the process minutiae. He famously spent the first 20 minutes of the first practice of the season showing his players how to put on their socks correctly.
Their socks.
No wrinkles, snug fit, to prevent blisters. And you think why? Because blisters distract players from the task at hand. He believed that excellence in the fundamentals made championships the natural consequence of process excellence.
Lou Gerstner took this same process-first approach to a hemorrhaging IBM in 1993.
He did. Facing pressure to break up the company, he famously declared that the last thing IBM needs right now is a vision. He needed to fix the daily execution.
So he didn't chase a stock price.
No, he focused on transforming IBM's archaic decision-making processes, breaking down internal silos, and orienting the entire organization toward customer solutions. He improved the quality of daily decisions. And by 1996, IBM was profitable again because the structure of decision-making was sound.
And this emphasis on process over outcome is deeply supported by the happiness paradox research.
It is. We chase these external achievements, believing they'll bring fulfillment, but the data just doesn't support it.
What does this show?
Well, Sonjalipa Mirske's research reveals that only about 10% of our happiness is influenced by external circumstances like wealth or status or getting a promotion. A full 40% comes from intentional activities, our daily choices, our habits, our processes, and the other 50% is just a genetic set point.
So if you obsess over the outcome, you are perpetually chasing a moving goalpost.
And that causes systemic exhaustion. Sean Akers' work confirms this. Success doesn't lead to happiness. Rather, cultivating happiness, engagement, and a focus on meaningful processes leads to sustained success.
And this philosophical shift from outcomes to process is the bedrock of the E.D.G.E. framework.
It's the essential first step.
So we've completed the required mindset shift. Now we need to build the practical, stable architecture for that new mindset. We move to part 2, CAST, establishing your foundation. The first pillar of the CAST foundation is control. Focusing relentlessly on what you can control, that core Stoic tenet. The turning point for Andy Grove at Intel in 1985 provides a powerful business case for this.
Oh, absolutely. Intel was the dominant player in memory chips, but aggressive Japanese competition was just destroying their market share. Grove and the CEO, Gordon Moore, they faced this unbearable situation where they were losing millions, yet the ingrained habit was to fight harder in the memory chip market.
Something they can no longer control.
Right, and that was the critical moment of clarity for Grove. He realized they could not control global market forces or foreign government subsidies.
So what did he do?
He walked into Moore's office and posed this hypothetical, objective question. If we got kicked out and the board brought in a new CEO, what would they do? And Moore replied immediately, they would get us out of memories.
And Grove said,
Why shouldn't you and I walk out the door, come back and do it ourselves? That day, they pivoted entirely to microprocessors, an emerging field that they could control.
That simplicity, that ability to externalize the problem is incredibly powerful.
It's the ultimate application of inner calm, which we see in extreme personal adversity, too. The story of Reuben Hurricane Carter, wrongfully imprisoned for nearly 20 years, embodies this.
He couldn't control the unjust conviction or the physical walls surrounding him?
No. That would drive most people to utter despair. But Carter exercised ultimate control over his internal state. He declared, "I am not a prisoner. I am a free man. My mind is free."
So he focused his energy inward.
He focused his 80% on internal mastery reading, writing, maintaining his inner dignity. He transformed the prison from a cage into a crucible for mental discipline, and that resilience stemmed from radically redefining the boundary of his control.
We, however, have a deep psychological need to feel in control, which often traps us.
That's the illusion of control. The psychologist Ellen Langer demonstrated this back in 1975. People who personally selected their lottery tickets valued them 4 times more than those who were given tickets randomly.
We equate personal choice with influence over the outcome.
It's a cognitive trap, and it's visible in the fall of BlackBerry.
How did BlackBerry fall into that illusion of control?
They were obsessed with defending what they had control over. Their secure network, their proprietary operating system, and of course the physical keyboard, which their corporate clients relied on.
So they dismissed the iPhone as a toy.
Because it didn't fit their known controllable model. In trying to tightly grip the controls of their past success, they lost control of the future, shrinking from dominance to irrelevance in less than a decade.
In contrast, IKEA demonstrated strategic control beautifully.
IKEA thrives because its entire model is built around controlling cost and efficiency. When faced with the monumental, uncontrollable challenge of global environmental sustainability, IKEA didn't try to influence international policy.
So what did they do instead?
They focused entirely on what they could control. Their own supply chain, their material sourcing shifting to sustainable forestry, and their cost structure. This focus on achievable, controllable internal metrics drove meaningful environmental progress and sustained their profitability.
To make this practical for you listening, the framework provides the dichotomy of control tool.
And this is a structured way to stop wasting energy on the unchangeable. You divide your energy into 3 buckets.
Okay.
80% on direct control. Your internal processes, your response, your personal preparation, defining your standards. 15% on indirect influence. Stakeholder communication, market perceptions, lobbying, mentorship. These are areas where you can nudge the outcome. And just 5% on monitoring, external events, competitor actions, global politics. Necessary to be aware of, but useless to agonize over.
So if a CEO, let's call him Michael, is facing a sudden massive material shortage due to an international conflict, something completely uncontrollable, how would he apply this?
Okay, so Michael spends only 5% of his energy monitoring the conflict and its geopolitical fallout. He spends 15% using strategic communication to manage investor and client expectations. That's indirect influence.
But the vast majority of his energy, the 80%, goes where?
To what he can directly control. Immediately redesigning the product for alternative materials, optimizing internal logistics to maximize the existing stock, and negotiating new local supplier contracts. By focusing 80% internally, he stabilizes the ship instead of collapsing under external panic.
That brings us to the second foundational pillar. Align actions with priorities. This is about ruthlessly fighting distraction.
And the cost of distraction is crippling. Scientific evidence from researchers like René Marat shows that multitasking can reduce your productivity by up to 40%.
Why is that?
It's because of the response selection bottleneck in the prefrontal cortex. We can really only process one cognitive task at a time, so when we switch, we pay a switching tax.
And what does that switching tax look like in the modern workplace?
Well, research shows that after an interruption, it takes an average of 23 minutes to fully regain focus on the original task. With attention spans now measured in seconds, the cumulative loss of focus means organizations frequently lose up to 42% of potential value during transformation initiatives simply because executive focus is constantly being diverted.
This makes Jeff Bezos' decision in the year 2000, during the dot-com implosion, a masterstroke of alignment.
The pressure on him was immense. Barron's magazine called Amazon.bomb. His own executives were pleading with him to conserve resources and focus purely on retail survival.
But Bezos saw misalignment.
He did. Amazon had built this massively scaled, hyper-efficient internal infrastructure to handle its retail business, and that infrastructure was going largely unutilized by the outside world.
So he aligned the company not with the external demands for cash flow, but with its internal core capability.
Precisely. Despite fierce executive resistance, he diverted resources to build what became Amazon Web Services, or AWS. He argued that every company building its own infrastructure was duplicating effort. It was like, in his words, each company building its own power plant.
So he aligned the company toward becoming the utility company for the internet age.
Leveraging their existing internal expertise. That strategic clarity is why AWS is now projected to generate over $110 billion in revenue by 2024.
And the alignment can't just be financial, it has to be rooted in deep purpose, as demonstrated by Patagonia.
Oh, Patagonia's entire history is a demonstration of relentless alignment with its core environmental purpose. Yvon Chouinard famously phased out their primary product, steel pitons, because they damaged the rock.
A huge business decision.
And later, they switched entirely to organic cotton in 1996, despite the much higher cost. But the most extreme example came in 2022, when Chouinard transferred ownership of the $3 billion company to a trust to ensure that its profits are permanently aligned with environmental protection.
And that clarity drives consistent financial growth because the customer knows exactly what they're buying into.
Exactly. To make this alignment practical, the framework uses the Enhanced 1010 Analysis.
Walk us through how that tool works practically to prevent that kind of emotional short-term thinking.
It forces you to analyze the consequences of a decision across 3 critical time horizons: 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years.
Okay.
So we use the example of Jason, a CEO presented with a high-growth investment offer. In the 10 minutes horizon, the initial feeling is just excitement and validation.
Of course.
In 10 months, the short-term financial boost and the press coverage look fantastic. But the crucial question is the 10 years view.
And what did that show him?
When Jason applied the 10-year analysis, he saw that the investor group's mandatory exit timeline required him to liquidate or sell the company, which conflicted profoundly with his personal vision of creating a multi-generational legacy in his industry.
So the immediate excitement evaporated.
Completely, when confronted with the long-term misalignment. He walked away from the exciting short-term deal to protect his 10-year alignment. And that is purposeful decision-making.
Our third pillar is span balancing next steps with long-term vision. This is about strategic timing and avoiding analysis paralysis.
Timing is everything. The failure of Friendster versus the success of Instagram highlights this perfectly. Friendster had the early lead in social networking. They hit 3 million users back in 2002.
I remember Friendster.
But they were trapped by analysis paralysis. They were constantly delaying necessary infrastructure investment and feature rollouts because of internal debate and fear of scaling costs.
Their hesitation cost them the market.
It did. Competitors, primarily MySpace and then Facebook, seized that strategic window. Instagram, launched years later, moved quickly with its core features image sharing, focusing on rapid iteration and execution when the moment demanded it. And they achieved a $1 billion acquisition in 2012 by mastering that strategic timing.
Steve Jobs demonstrated a different kind of spanning during his post-Apple exile. It wasn't about speed, but strategic patience.
That's a great point. He used his time away from Apple to make these crucial long-term investments. He poured resources into NextT, which developed technology that was way ahead of its time, but laid the groundwork for future Apple operating systems.
And he also acquired Pixar.
Critically, yes. He acquired Pixar, a small graphics studio balancing immediate cash allocation needs with a vision for how technology would transform the animation and entertainment industry a decade later. He was simultaneously building for Horizon 2, the NextT technology, and Horizon 3, Pixar's transformative capability.
And the practical tool for spanning these different horizons is the 3 Horizons framework.
This framework helps you categorize your strategic efforts into 3 buckets. Horizon 1 is maintain, focusing on existing systems, current profitability, and vital relationships, your non-negotiables. Horizon 2 is build, emerging opportunities, scaling existing successes, and bridging the gap to the future. And Horizon 3 is create, transformative initiatives, new capabilities, and the long-term research that defines the next paradigm.
Let's apply this using the example from the book of Thomas, a division leader considering a major promotion that required excessive travel.
So Thomas used the framework to assess the real cost. His Horizon 1 was non-negotiable, supporting his children through their final years of high school college applications, sports championships. The promotion while it aligned perfectly with his Horizon 2, building executive skills, and Horizon 3, achieving future C-suite status.
It directly compromised his Horizon 1 stability.
And the framework helped him quantify that non-negotiable cost. Because H1 was critical, he declined the immediate promotion and successfully negotiated a staged transition plan 2 years later. He didn't sacrifice his long-term ambition, the span, but he protected his immediate non-renewable priorities.
Finally, we move to the last foundational pillar, track metrics that truly matter. This requires redefining enough.
And the pursuit of more often leads to the loss of meaning. The tragic failure of Yahoo illustrates this perfectly. In the late 90s and early 2000s, Yahoo chased expansion into dozens of tangential ventures, social media, content, search, trying to be everything to everyone.
They lost sight of their core identity.
And their core metric. Their desire for endless expansion meant they spread resources too thin, they prioritized breadth over depth, and notoriously, they passed on acquiring both Google and Facebook when those opportunities arose.
By chasing more, they lost the ability to focus
on the one or two metrics that genuinely defined their value and that culminated in their sale for a fraction of their peak worth.
This is where we bring back the Stoic idea of temperance and the wisdom of setting non-negotiable principles, or rocks, as Clayton Christensen described them.
Christensen, a devout man, famously told the story of his youth when, as an avid basketball player, he refused to play in a championship game because it was scheduled on a Sunday. He said those moments, when the cost of commitment is highest, are what define your principles. If you compromise your non-negotiables when it's convenient, they cease to be non-negotiable.
And the ultimate wisdom of enough comes from the legendary Ferruccio Lamborghini.
After being famously insulted by Enzo Ferrari, Lamborghini was motivated to build a superior sports car. He succeeded, but then his engineers constantly pushed him to enter Formula One racing, seeing it as the ultimate chance for vindication and public triumph over Ferrari.
Most competitive leaders would jump at that chance for a public victory.
But Lamborghini refused. He chose the wisdom of enough. He realized that entering racing would demand a complete refocus of resources, destabilize his family life, and compromise the calm focus he had cultivated.
So he chose to focus exclusively on luxury road cars.
Protecting his peace of mind, defining a clear brand identity, and avoiding that relentless, endless cycle of ambition, he protected his core values over chasing external validation.
And the tool to enforce this wisdom is the values metrics matrix.
This framework forces you to ensure your measurement systems authentically reflect your core values, not just investor expectations. We use the example of Sophia, the founder of an edtech startup. Investors only cared about raw user growth, a vanity metric.
But her core values were educational impact and accessibility.
So using the matrix, Sophia chose metrics that were aligned with those values. Percentage improvement in student test scores, retention rates in underserved communities, and usage frequency. This allowed her to align her team and her investors around a definition of success that was sustainable, mission-driven, and truly mattered, rather than just chasing the number on the user growth chart.
So we have the stable platform, CAST control, align, span, and track. Now we shift to the dynamic execution phase. E.D.G.E. in action, starting with diagnose. Diagnosis is the moment of truth. You have to cut through the noise, the denial, and your own biases. This is precisely what Anne Mulcahy did when she took over Xerox in late 2000, facing near bankruptcy and losing $1 billion annually.
Mulcahy's diagnosis was based on radical humility. She refused to cling defensively to Xerox's traditional identity as merely a copier company. Her first action was extensive customer outreach. She became the master of, meeting with customers to understand what they actually needed, not what Xerox thought they needed.
So she used external reality to challenge all the internal assumptions.
That's right. And she discovered customers needed comprehensive, integrated solutions for information management and digital workflow, not just hardware. Despite the crisis, she maintained the $1.5 billion annual R&D investment, strategically repositioning Xerox from a failing copier company to a profitable B2B digital workflow solutions provider.
A huge turnaround.
By 2008, 72% of their revenue came from subscription services. Her success hinged on overcoming cognitive blind spots, which are pervasive even among experts.
Right, like inattentional blindness.
Yeah, exactly. We are all susceptible to inattentional blindness, famously demonstrated by the invisible gorilla experiment, where focusing on one task causes us to miss a massive, obvious change in the environment. and inattentional deafness, where we fail to hear verbal cues because we're mentally rehearsing our own response.
I've seen that happen.
I saw this in a retail CEO who was so focused on grand acquisition plans that he was completely blind to his internal team's toxic complacency.
So to systematically fight this bias and ensure a balanced, objective diagnosis, the framework integrates the 6 thinking hats.
This tool from Edward de Bono is a powerful framework to prevent groupthink. It requires the team to cycle through 6 distinct parallel mindsets, ensuring every facet of the problem is considered.
Can you walk us through the hats?
Sure. The white hat is for objective facts and data. The red hat is for feelings, intuition, acknowledging emotional response without justification. The black hat is for risks and caution, identifying flaws, the worst-case scenarios.
The opposite of that would be
The yellow hat, which is for opportunities, optimism, seeing benefits and strengths. Then you have the green hat for creativity, generating new ideas and alternatives. And finally, the blue hat for process control, organizing the discussion and defining the next steps.
So if a team were diagnosing whether to launch a new, unproven product line, how would they use the hats sequentially?
Okay, so they'd start with blue to define the agenda, then white, laying out all known market data and internal costs. Then they'd move to black, identifying every possible risk, technical failure, market rejection. Then yellow, the potential upside. Green, how can we make this process cheaper or faster? And finally red, how do key stakeholders feel about taking this risk?
And that sequencing ensures that the optimism of the yellow hat doesn't suppress the necessary caution of the black hat.
Precisely. Another powerful diagnostic technique is Charlie Munger's inversion. Munger's famous quote is, "All I want to know is where I'm going to die, so I'll never go there."
So instead of asking how to succeed, you invert the problem.
And ask, how could we absolutely fail? This forces preemptive risk anticipation. We also pair this with comparing the inside view, which is our internal, often overly optimistic assessment, with the outside view, the objective statistical pattern, like the fact that 90% of startups fail.
Once we have diagnosed clearly, we must move to the next execution step. Go move without haste or hesitation. Alan Mulally at Ford gives us the defining example of calculated action.
In 2006, facing a $17 billion loss, Mulally knew Ford was bleeding cash and a recession was inevitable. Analysis paralysis would have been fatal. His decision was controversial but calculated. Mortgage every single Ford asset, including the iconic blue oval logo, for $24 billion in loans.
But wait, earlier we talked about the danger of excessive risk-taking. How was this go decision different from the recklessness we saw at Enron or Wells Fargo?
That's the critical distinction. Enron's risk was fraudulent and based on hiding information to achieve unrealistic goals. Mulally's action was based on clarity, not haste. He diagnosed the need for liquidity before the 2008 financial crisis hit, securing capital while it was still available.
So it was a calculated, painful action based on strategic foresight.
Not a desperate gamble. And that liquidity he secured in 2006 allowed Ford to invest and restructure through the crisis, making it the only major U.S. automaker to avoid a government bailout.
Thoughtful action over analysis paralysis.
Exactly. This contrasts sharply with the Cobra effect, the danger of hasty, poorly structured incentives like the Wells Fargo sales targets that directly led to mass fraud. The key is the measured response.
Like the 2010 Chilean mine rescue.
A perfect illustration. The response was swift to ensure survival once the 33 trapped miners were located. But the execution, the drilling, and planning of the rescue itself was methodically planned, calculated, and executed over 69 days, minimizing risk through precision and structure. They prioritized the process over the speed of extraction.
And the cost of failing to act decisively is just as high as recklessness.
That's the price of paralysis, exemplified by Siemens Mobile. Despite having excellent engineering and technology, they were paralyzed by their engineering-first culture. They failed to adapt quickly to the market shift toward user-friendly design and consumer focus.
So they became irrelevant.
By 2005, their paralysis was so complete they were irrelevant, and they ultimately paid Taiwan's BenQ 250 million euros just to take the failing business off their hands.
Wow. So to ensure thoughtful movement, the framework uses the pre-mortem analysis.
Developed by Gary Klein, this is Munger's inversion applied to execution. The team imagines the project has spectacularly failed 1 year from now and then works backward to identify the causes.
How does that work in practice?
We use the example of Carlos, an EVP of operations, who used this before migrating a legacy supply chain system. His team preemptively identified that integration failures with older systems would cause massive delays.
So what did that diagnosis allow him to go and do?
It allowed him to proactively allocate additional budget and testing resources specifically to legacy integration resources he wouldn't have secured otherwise. He turned a potential unanticipated disaster into a manageable anticipated delay. That's the power of calculated action.
Finally, we reach the last crucial step of execution. Evolve pivot with purpose, not panic. Satya Nadella's transformation of Microsoft is the ultimate modern case study.
When Nadella took over in 2014, Microsoft had missed the mobile revolution and was culturally stagnant, trapped in these internal fiefdoms. His strategic shift was profound. Cloud first, mobile first, embracing competitors like iOS and Android.
And he coupled this with a radical cultural shift.
Toward a growth mindset. He broke decades of Microsoft orthodoxy, making Office 365 available on Apple devices, for example. That was the defining evolutionary moment.
He recognized that preserving the old way of doing business was the path to extinction.
And that systematic evolution, driven by purpose and not panic, resulted in Microsoft's market value surging from $300 billion to over $3 trillion by the end of 2024.
We also see this kind of instant life-saving adaptation in the Mangolch fire example.
Wagner Dodge, a smoke jumper fighting a major wildfire, suddenly found his traditional escape route cut off by the racing flames. Facing certain death, he adapted instantly, inventing the escape fire.
How did that work?
He burned the grass around him to create a safe zone of ash where the main inferno couldn't find fuel. This required instantaneous courage and evolvability when traditional systems failed.
And evolution often happens through manageable, incremental steps, not giant leaps.
That's Carl Weick's principle of small wins. You break massive, paralyzing challenges into small, manageable achievements to build psychological momentum and confidence.
Like Slack.
Slack is a great case study. They pivoted from a failed online game called Glitch. Instead of throwing everything away, they focused on their internal communication tool, incrementally refining it based on small, validated successes, which eventually led to the creation of the massive platform we know today.
The danger, though, is incrementalism that just supports the status quo. We saw that at Sony with the minidisc.
Sony was the master of physical media. When the digital revolution arrived, they responded with incremental improvements to the minidisc, making it slightly smaller or giving it slightly more storage. They were trapped by a status quo bias.
So they failed to challenge the fundamental paradigm.
The paradigm of digital distribution set by the iPod and iTunes. Their failure wasn't ignoring innovation, it was innovating in a way that ensured they remained brittle.
And finally, the ultimate display of crisis evolvability. Apollo 13 in 1970.
The success of Apollo 13 was not a miracle. It was structured adaptation under extreme pressure. When the oxygen tank exploded, the crew and mission control operated under extreme constraints but maintained clear priorities: power, oxygen, navigation.
The famous improvised CO2 filter.
Using duct tape and plastic bags to fit a score filter into a round hole, it demonstrated the power of flexibility and innovation guided by clear priorities. It was a crisis evolution that saved 3 lives.
This completes the E.D.G.E system. We've moved from the foundational mindset through the stable CAST foundation and into the dynamic DGE execution. So how do we ensure this systematic approach sticks in real-world leadership scenarios?
Well, Part 4 applies the framework directly to high-stakes challenges, starting with crisis leadership, where clarity and chaos is mandatory.
The gold standard here remains the 1982 J&J Tylenol crisis.
Chairman James Burke applied the Align principle immediately. His decision to recall Tylenol across the entire nation, sacrificing billions in product value for public safety, was entirely guided by the company Credo, the non-negotiable alignment.
And that choice, prioritizing people over profit.
It built generational brand equity because the public saw their values manifested in action during the chaos.
And the characteristics that enabled Burke apply universally to all effective crisis leaders.
Yes. We see 6 universal characteristics. Cognitive clarity, like Jamie Dimon methodically evaluating the landscape and making strategic acquisitions post-2008 while others panic.
And emotional stability.
Gene Kranz maintaining composure during Apollo 13. Then strategic evolvability, like Sully Sullenberger adapting standard procedures for the Hudson River landing. Also stakeholder awareness, temporal balance, and learning agility.
Next, building resilient team strength in unity. We look at the 2004 Boston Red Sox comeback.
Being down 3-0 against the Yankees, facing a generational curse that demanded impossible resilience. Their comeback was based on collective purpose, trust, and the psychological safety needed to try radical plays and risk failure.
This mirrors Google's Project Aristotle research.
It does. That research identified psychological safety, the belief that team members can take interpersonal risks without humiliation, as the single most important factor in team effectiveness and peak performance.
That trust provides the foundation for the kind of diagnostic honesty needed in the DGE phase. Finally, we must address the legacy question choices that echo through time.
This asks how we ensure that our core values and purpose endure long after we leave. John Mackey's decision to sell Whole Foods to Amazon in 2017 is a fascinating, complex case of adaptive legacy.
How so?
Facing aggressive activist investors and financial decline, Mackey chose to use the strategic transaction with Amazon to ensure the core values, quality, sustainability, supplier relationships, could endure and evolve through Amazon's technological innovation and scale.
So he used the evolve principle, the strategic transaction, to preserve the align principle, the core values.
That's the definition of adaptive tradition, which we see historically with Kongugumi, the 1,428-year-old Japanese temple builders. They maintain their core tradition by continuously incorporating modern materials, pivoting their business during crises like building coffins during WWII, and adapting their methods to keep the foundational craft alive and relevant for centuries.
And we end where we began, with the personal crucible strength in professional setbacks.
We return to Steve Jobs. His ouster from Apple in 1985 was devastating, yet he called it his ultimate catalyst. It allowed him to replace the heaviness of being successful with the lightness of being a beginner again.
And that personal crucible forced an identity recalibration.
Leading to his most creative period, founding NextT and acquiring Pixar, which provided the technology and capital for his eventual triumphant return.
Jamie Dimon's career follows a similar path.
Being fired from Citigroup in 1998 was a major professional setback, but rather than collapsing, he leveraged that time to refine his leadership, ultimately leading JP Morgan Chase to emerge as the strongest bank post-2008 crisis. Setbacks are not endpoints. They are necessary catalysts for unprecedented growth if we apply the E.D.G.E. principles. Diagnose the situation honestly, go forward with resolve, and evolve from the experience.
This has been a truly comprehensive breakdown of a systematic approach to uncertainty, moving from the necessary philosophical shift to a step-by-step architecture for execution.
We have unpacked the entire E.D.G.E. framework, covering the Stoic Foundation, the stable CAST platform, and the dynamic DGE execution. This system provides you with the capability to convert uncertainty into a reliable competitive edge.
It allows you to make confident, calculated decisions even with incomplete information and build strategies designed for resilience.
And the core truth here, the ultimate takeaway, is that true mastery is not about controlling outcomes. It's about making consistently better choices and cultivating the clarity, resilience, and adaptability to find your way.
We must constantly be willing to let go of the rigid life we planned in favor of the adaptable life we must build, as Joseph Campbell suggested.
The world will only get more complex, but your thinking can now be systematic.
You now possess a systematic toolkit for transformation. So let's leave you with one final provocative thought, tying back to that profound insight of the Lamborghini legacy, the wisdom of enough, which guides the track pillar. Look at your life right now, professional or personal. What is one vanity metric? A metric that looks impressive on paper but constantly distracts you from what truly aligns with your core values and mission, that you need to identify and discard today. Think about that and transform your focus.